My name's Jax. Been in the smuggling game longer than I care to remember. Out here, the only law is survival, and survival means making deals with devils more often than not. That's how I found myself and my crew in a bar on the edge of Helios Station, nursing drinks that tasted like engine coolant and listening to Varus spin his pitch. Varus was the kind of man you didn't trust unless you had a death wish. Scarred face, eyes like cold steel, and a reputation that could curdle milk. He sat across from me, a half smirk on his lips, as if he already knew we'd take the job. "I've got a cargo needs transporting. High security, high discretion, pays more than your last 10 runs combined," he said, sliding a datapad across the table. I glanced at the figures and whistled low. It was a king's ransom, enough to get us out of the smuggling racket for good if we played our cards right. I looked around at my crew. There was Marcus, my second-in-command, built like a brick wall, but with a brain sharper than a monomolecular blade. Beside him, Lila, our tech wizard, her fingers twitching for a chance to hack into something juicy. And then there was Jet, our pilot, a wiry man with a perpetual sneer and nerves of steel. They all eyed the datapad, temptation and suspicion warring on their faces. "What's the catch?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. With Varus, there was always a catch. He chuckled, a sound like gravel scraping metal. "Just one. The cargo stays sealed. You don't open it. You don't ask questions. Deliver it to Viridia 5. No stops, no detours." Marcus exchanged a look with Lila, who shrugged. Jet just snorted. "Sounds too easy." Varus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Easy's not a word I'd use, but if you're as good as they say, it shouldn't be a problem." I tapped the datapad, considering. We'd been through worse for less. The ship, Black Hydra, was in good shape, fully stocked, and we were due for a payday. I made the decision. "We'll take it." Varus nodded, standing up. "Good choice. The cargo's already on your ship. Coordinates are locked in. Don't screw this up, Jax." He left, and the bar seemed to exhale a breath it had been holding. I pocketed the datapad and motioned for the crew to follow me back to the ship. Back on the ship, we found the cargo bay already loaded. The container was an ominous black, smooth and featureless, about the size of a small shuttle. It emitted a faint vibration that you could feel in your body. "What the hell is this thing?" Lila muttered, her curiosity barely contained. "Doesn't matter," I said. "We don't touch it, just get it to Viridia 5 and get paid." Jet whistled softly. "I've got a bad feeling about this." "Join the club," Marcus replied, but he moved to the control panel to set our course. "All right, boss, we're ready to go." The drone from the cargo never stopped. It was a constant presence that settled into the back of my mind like a splinter. We'd been in space for only a few hours when the first incident occurred. I was in the cockpit with Jet, watching the stars streak by as we traveled through hyperspace. The ship's systems beeped, a symphony of technology that I usually found comforting, but not today. Today, every sound felt like a prelude to disaster. Jet was quiet. He was the best pilot I'd ever known, but even he seemed on edge. His eyes darted to the readouts, then back to the viewport, his jaw clenched tight. "What's on your mind?" I asked, trying to break the tension. He didn't look at me. "Just got a bad feeling about this job, Jax. That cargo. It's not right. Gives me the creeps." I couldn't argue with that. "We'll be fine. Get it to Viridia 5 and we're done. Simple as that." Jet grunted, clearly not convinced. Before I could say anything else, Lila's voice came over the intercom. "Captain, we've got a problem in the cargo bay. You better come see this." I exchanged a look with Jet, then headed down to the cargo bay. When I got there, Marcus and Lila were standing near the container, both looking more than a little spooked. "What's going on?" I demanded. Lila pointed at the container. It started glowing, Jax, just a faint light, but enough to notice, and there's this pressure like it's pushing against us. I stepped closer, squinting at the smooth surface. She was right. A dim green light seeped from the seams, pulsing like a heartbeat. I could feel it too, an almost physical weight pushing against me, making it hard to breathe. Any idea what could be causing it? Marcus asked. I shook my head. None, and I don't like it. We're sticking to the plan. No one touches this thing. Jax, Lila said quietly, I think there's something alive in there. I wanted to dismiss her, to say she was imagining things, but I couldn't. The cargo felt aware. We can't open it, I said firmly. Varus made it clear. No questions, no peeking. Marcus nodded reluctantly, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. All right, Cap. We'll keep an eye on it. I left the cargo bay, the anxiety growing stronger with every step. Back in the cockpit, Jet was still at the controls, but he glanced at me with a question in his eyes. Just keep us on course, I told him, sinking into my chair. We need to get this job done. In the middle of my restless sleep, a loud bang jolted me awake. I shot up and reached for the comm. What the hell was that? Lila's voice came through, shaky and breathless. Something's wrong with the engines. I'm on my way to check it out. I threw on my clothes and headed to the engine room, meeting Lila and Marcus there. What happened? I asked, surveying the damage. Not sure yet, Lila said, diving into the control panel. Looks like a power surge, but I can't pinpoint the cause. It's like the ship's systems are fighting against us. Marcus cursed under his breath. This damn cargo, it's got to be connected. I didn't want to admit he was right, but the evidence was piling up. Can you fix it? Lila nodded, though she looked pale. I'll do my best, but we need to be careful. If the systems are compromised, we could be in serious trouble. I watched her work, feeling helpless. The Black Hydra had been through hell and back, but this was different. This wasn't just technical problems. It was something evil, something that wanted us to fail. Finally, Lila managed to stabilize the engines. I called the crew together in the mess hall. All right, I began, looking at each of them in turn. We need to get a handle on this. Whatever's in that container, it's affecting the ship. We need to stay focused and get to Viridia 5 as fast as possible. And if it gets worse? Jet asked, his face drawn with worry. We deal with it, I said, though the words felt empty. We're not backing down now. Lila rubbed her temples, looking exhausted. I'll keep an eye on the systems, but if this keeps up, we might not make it to our destination. We will, I insisted, more for my own sake than theirs. I was halfway through my third cup of synth coffee, trying to shake off the lingering exhaustion, when Marcus stormed into the mess hall. Jax, you need to see this, he said, not waiting for a response before turning on his heel and heading towards the cargo bay. I followed him. The rest of the crew was already there, standing in a loose semicircle around the container. Lila was the first to speak. It's gotten worse. The light is brighter, and the pressure, it's almost unbearable. I stepped closer, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Jet, never one to mince words, spat out, This thing's gonna kill us if we don't do something, Jax. I knew he was right. We couldn't ignore it any longer. Lila, can you get any readings on this thing? Anything that tells us what this is? She pulled out a portable scanner. The device whirred to life, casting a blue light over the container. There's something inside, she said slowly. It's emitting some kind of energy, but I can't pinpoint the source. It's almost like... Like what? Marcus demanded, his patience fraying. Like it's alive, she finished, her voice shaking. The idea of a living cargo was bad enough, but the reality of what that might mean was far worse. Can we open it? Just a crack to see what's inside? Jet looked at me like I'd lost my mind. You sure that's a good idea? Varus said. Varus isn't here, I snapped. We are. And if we're gonna survive this, we need to know what we're up against. Reluctantly, Jet and Marcus moved to the container. Lila handed me the scanner, her eyes pleading with me to be careful. I nodded, trying to muster some semblance of confidence. On 3, I said, my voice barely steady. 1, 2, 3. Jet and Marcus pried open the lid, just a fraction. The green light flared, bright and blinding, forcing us to shield our eyes. The pressure intensified, a tangible force that pressed against my skull, making it hard to think. As my eyes adjusted, I peered inside. The sight that greeted me was worse than anything I could have imagined. The container held a mass of shadows, shapes that seemed to shift and twist, never settling into a coherent form. Faces emerged from the darkness, their eyes filled with an unimaginable horror. I stumbled back. "Close it! Close it now!" Jet and Marcus slammed the lid shut, the green light fading but the pressure lingering. I sank to the floor. "What the hell was that?" Jet demanded. "Soul prison," Lila whispered, her face ashen. "I've read about them, but I never thought. They're supposed to be myths. Containers for the souls of the damned, used by ancient civilizations to trap and punish their enemies." Marcus swore under his breath. "And we're hauling one across the galaxy." Great. This was worse than anything I'd ever faced. "We need to get rid of it, jettison it into space." Lila shook her head. "It's not that simple. Soul prisons are powerful. If we just dump it, the souls inside could escape. They're angry, vengeful. They'd destroy us and anyone else they could reach." "Then what do we do?" Jet asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "We deliver it," I said. "We stick to the plan, get it to Viridia 5 and let Varus deal with it. We're not equipped to handle something like this." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but there was no argument. They knew as well as I did that we were in over our heads. Back in my quarters, I tried to rest, but the images of those tortured faces tormented me. I knew we had to keep moving, but each hour brought us closer to a confrontation I wasn't sure we could survive. In the dead of night, I found myself drawn back to the cargo bay. "Jax!" Lila's voice startled me, and I turned to see her standing in the doorway. "You okay?" "Not really," I admitted. "This thing, it's getting to me. To all of us. We need to stay strong, Jax. If we lose it now, we're done for." I wanted to believe her, but the presence of the soul prison made it hard to hold on to hope. "We'll get through this," I said, more to convince myself than her. Sleep became a distant memory. Each of us had our own corner of hell, plagued by the visions that seeped into our dreams. The soul prison's influence grew stronger, its insidious hands reaching deeper into our minds. Tensions among the crew escalated as our sanity frayed. Marcus was the first to snap. I found him in the mess hall, pacing like a caged animal. His eyes were bloodshot and he muttered to himself, words I couldn't make out. "Marcus," I said gently, stepping into his line of sight. "You need to get some rest." He stopped pacing and looked at me, his expression wild. "Rest? How can I rest when they're screaming? Can't you hear them, Jax? They're in my head." I grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to meet my eyes. "Listen to me. We're all feeling it, but we have to stay in control. If we lose it, we're dead, you hear me?" He blinked, some semblance of sanity returning. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I hear you. It's so damn loud." "I know," I said, releasing him. "But we have to hold on." I left him there, still muttering under his breath, and headed to the cockpit. Jet was at the controls. He didn't look at me as I entered. "How are we holding up?" I asked, sinking into the co-pilot's seat. He shrugged, his hands on the controls, but his knuckles white with tension. "We're still on course, but the ship, it's like it's fighting us. Systems are glitching, engines are straining. It's like something doesn't want us to reach Viridia 5. It's the soul prison," I said grimly. "It's trying to break us." Jet finally turned to look at me, fear and anger in his eyes. "And it's doing a damn good job. What if we can't make it, Jax? What if this thing kills us before we get there?" I had no answers, only a growing dread. "We'll make it," I said. Lila appeared in the doorway looking worried. "Captain, we've got another problem. Rhea's locked herself in her quarters. She's not responding to the comm." I swore under my breath. Rhea was one of our best, tough and reliable, but the soul prison was breaking her too. "I'll handle it." I made my way to Rhea's quarters, the corridors feeling narrower. I could hear faint whispers, like voices just out of reach. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog from my mind. "Rhea?" I called, knocking on her door. "It's Jax. Open up." No response. I tried the comm panel. "Rhea, we need to talk. Open the door." Still nothing. I keyed in the override code and the door slid open. The sight that greeted me was worse than I'd feared. Rhea was huddled in the corner, rocking back and forth. "They're inside me," she whispered, her voice broken. "I can feel them crawling, screaming. Make them stop, Jax. Please, make them stop." I knelt beside her, my heart aching. "We're going to get through this, Rhea. You have to stay strong." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a despair that cut deep. "I can't. It's too much. I can't." I had no words to comfort her, no way to ease her pain. The soul prison was winning, and I felt powerless to stop it. I stayed with her until she finally fell into a restless sleep, then left her quarters. Back in the cockpit, I found Lila and Jet waiting. "We need to do something," Lila said. "If we don't find a way to counteract this influence, we're all going to end up like Rhea." "We can't turn back," I said, though the thought of abandoning the mission had crossed my mind more than once. "If we do, we'll never escape this thing. We have to keep moving forward." Jet shook his head. "Forward to what? More madness, more death?" "We need a plan," Lila insisted. "Something to protect us, to keep the soul prison from breaking us completely." I thought for a moment, the fog of exhaustion and fear clouding my mind. "We need to isolate it. Maybe if we reinforce the containment field, we can weaken its influence. Lila, can you rig something up?" She nodded, though she looked doubtful. "I can try, but it's going to take time, and we don't have much of that." "Do what you can," I said. "Jet, keep us on course. No detours, no stops." As they set to work, I took a moment to collect myself. The crew was counting on me, and I couldn't afford to let them down. We were walking a razor's edge, and one wrong step could send us all spiraling into madness. The hours dragged on, each one a battle against the creeping dread that pervaded the ship. Lila worked, rigging up a containment field around the cargo bay. The green glow dimmed slightly, and the pressure lessened, but the vibration persisted, a constant reminder of the darkness we carried. Marcus seemed to stabilize, though the look in his eyes never faded. Rhea remained in her quarters, slipping in and out of lucidity. I checked on her frequently, but there was little I could do except offer what small comfort I could. One night, as I lay in my bunk, I heard the whispers again. Louder this time. They were voices, distinct and clear, though the language was unfamiliar. I sat up and saw a figure standing at the foot of my bed. "Who are you?" I demanded, though my voice trembled. The figure didn't respond, just watched me with eyes that glowed green. I reached for my sidearm, but when I looked back, the figure was gone. Sleep was impossible after that. I paced the corridors, checking on the crew, trying to keep my mind occupied. The whispers followed me, and I could feel the soul prison's influence burrowing deeper, trying to break my will. In the cockpit, Jet was slumped over the controls, eyes closed. I shook him awake, and he jerked upright. "Jax! I saw them! The souls! They were here, in the cockpit. They're trying to take us down!" I gripped his shoulder, trying to steady him. "We're not going to let them. We're getting to Viridia 5 no matter what." The Black Hydra had become a floating nightmare. Despite Lila's best efforts, the containment field around the soul prison only offered marginal relief. The pressure on our minds was a constant assault that wore us down, minute by minute. It was in this atmosphere that the mutiny began. Jet approached me in the cockpit, his eyes darting nervously around the room. "We need to talk, Jax." I nodded, already dreading the conversation. "What's on your mind?" He leaned in, lowering his voice as if afraid the ship itself might be listening. "It's Rhea. She's been talking to Marcus and Lila. They're scared, Jax. They think we need to get rid of the cargo. Now." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "We can't do that, Jet. You know what will happen if those souls are released." "I know, but they're not thinking straight. This thing is driving us all insane. You need to talk to them, convince them we have to stay the course." I sighed, rubbing my temples. The constant thrum of the soul prison had given me a perpetual headache. "I'll talk to them, but you need to keep flying. No matter what happens, we keep moving." Jet nodded, though he didn't look reassured. "Just be careful, Jax. They're on edge." I found Rhea, Marcus and Lila in the mess hall, their conversation halting abruptly as I entered. The tension in the room was obvious, and I knew I had to tread carefully. "What's going on?" I asked, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. Rhea stepped forward, her eyes burning with fear and determination. "Jax, we can't keep doing this. That thing in the cargo bay is killing us. We need to get rid of it before it destroys us all." "I understand your concerns," I said slowly, "but jettisoning isn't an option. If those souls get free, they'll wreak havoc on everything they touch. We have to see this through." Marcus shook his head. "We're not equipped to handle this. We're just a bunch of smugglers, not exorcists." Lila, usually the calm voice of reason, looked on the verge of tears. "I've tried everything I can think of to reinforce the containment, but it's not enough. It's getting stronger. If we don't do something soon, it'll tear us apart." I felt the weight of their words, but I couldn't let them see my own fear. "Listen, I get it. This isn't what we signed up for, but we can't just dump it. Varys warned us, and now I see why. We need to keep going. We're close." Marcus's face hardened. "Close to what? Our own deaths? I can't do this anymore. I won't." The room fell silent. I knew then that Marcus wasn't just speaking for himself. He was the voice of the mutiny that had been brewing under the surface. Before I could respond, a loud crash echoed through the ship. "What the hell was that?" Jet's voice came over the comm. I rushed to the cockpit, the others close behind. The control panels were sparking, the ship's systems going haywire. "We've lost main power," Jet said, frantically trying to stabilize the ship. "Something's overriding the controls." "Lila, get to engineering, see if you can restore the power." Lila nodded and sprinted off, but Marcus and Rhea stayed behind. "This is what I'm talking about," Marcus said. "We can't keep fighting this thing. It's too powerful." "Just give me some time," I said, trying to stay calm. "We can fix this." But deep down I knew he was right. The soul prison was too powerful, its influence too pervasive. In engineering, Lila worked to restore power. "It's not working," she said, her voice tinged with panic. "The systems are locked down." I clenched my fists. The soul prison was winning, its dark influence spreading through the ship, driving us to the brink of madness. Back in the cockpit, Jet was struggling to keep the ship steady. "We're losing it. If we don't get the power back soon, we're going to be drifting in space." "Keep it together," I said, though my own resolve was slipping. "We'll figure something out." The ship shook again. Lights dimmed once more, then went out completely, plunging us into darkness. I heard a sound that gave me the creeps, faint footsteps slowly coming closer. "Who's there?" I demanded. A figure emerged from the shadows, scarcely visible in the darkness. It was Rhea, her face twisted with anger. "This is your fault, Jax. You brought us here. You're the reason we're all going to die," she hissed. "Rhea, listen to me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We can still get through this, but we need to work together." She shook her head. "No, it's too late. We're doomed, and it's all because of you." Before I could react, she jumped at me, a knife glinting in her hand. I managed to dodge, the blade grazing my arm. Pain flared, sharp and hot, but I pushed it aside, grappling with her in the confined space of the cockpit. We struggled, the knife flashing between us, until I finally managed to knock it from her hand. She stumbled back, breathing heavily. "You're going to get us all killed." I didn't have time to respond. The ship shook again, and the lights came back to life. Lila's voice sounded over the comm, breathless but triumphant. "I got it! Power's back online." Jet immediately set to work, stabilizing the ship's systems. I turned to Rhea, still catching my breath. "We're not done yet, we can still make it." She didn't respond, just looked at me with fear and despair. The mutiny had been quelled, but the damage was done. We were hanging on by a thread, and the soul prison's dark influence was still growing. I couldn't sleep again. I lay on my bunk, staring at the ceiling. My thoughts spun, filled with visions of the faces I had seen inside the container. I was drifting between exhaustion and a restless awareness when I heard the sound. It was a low, sinister laugh, echoing through the corridors. I sat up, reaching for my sidearm, and moved towards the source of the sound. The laugh grew louder as I approached the cargo bay. It was a cruel, mocking sound. I stepped inside. The green light from the container was brighter. In the center of the room stood a shape, its form shifting like smoke. Its eyes glowed green, and its mouth twisted into a maniacal grin. It spoke, its voice a sound that seemed to pierce my mind. "You think you can contain us, mortal? You think you can survive the wrath of the damned?" I raised my sidearm, trying to steady my shaking hand. "What do you want?" The figure laughed again. "We want revenge. We want freedom. You are nothing but vermin, and we will crush you." I could feel its presence, a force that made it hard to breathe. "What are you?" "We are the souls of a fallen civilization," it hissed. "Condemned to this prison, seeking release. Your kind destroyed us, and now you will suffer our wrath." I took a step back. "Why us?" The figure's grin widened. "Because you were foolish enough to carry us. You are the tools of our revenge, and we will use you to unleash our fury upon the galaxy." I felt a surge of anger cutting through my fear. "We didn't know. We're just trying to survive." The figure's eyes narrowed, its voice dripping with contempt. "Ignorance will not save you. You are already doomed." Before I could respond, the figure dissolved into a cloud of shadows, vanishing into the darkness. I stumbled out of the cargo bay, making my way to the mess hall, my thoughts a chaotic jumble. The crew was gathered, their faces tense. Rhea looked up as I entered, her eyes filled with dread. "What is it, Jax?" I took a deep breath. "We're dealing with the souls of an annihilated civilization. They're seeking revenge for their destruction, and they're using us to do it." Lila looked at me. "What can we do? How do we stop them?" I wished I had an answer. "I don't know, but we have to find a way. If they get loose, they'll destroy everything in their path." I barely slept that night, thinking about the souls trapped in the container. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces twisted in agony and rage. The next morning, the crew was quiet and tense. We moved through our routines mechanically, each of us lost in our own fears. I was in the cockpit with Jet, staring at the navigation console, when the scream tore through the ship. It was a sound of pure terror. "That came from Rhea's quarters," Jet said, his voice tight with fear. I bolted from the cockpit, Jet close behind. We found Rhea standing in the doorway of her quarters. She was whispering something. "Rhea?" I called, approaching her cautiously. "What's wrong?" She turned to look at me, and I saw that her eyes were completely black. No whites, no irises, just an abyss. She smiled, a cold, cruel smile that didn't belong to her. "They're coming," she said in a voice that wasn't hers. "The souls. They're coming for you." Before I could react, she raised her hand, and an invisible force slammed into me, throwing me against the wall. Pain exploded in my side, and I struggled to catch my breath. Jet tried to help me up, but Rhea stepped forward. "You can't stop us," she hissed. "We will be free." She moved towards the cargo bay. Jet and I followed, knowing we had to stop her, but unsure how. We reached the cargo bay just as Rhea reached the container. She placed her hand on it, and the green light flared, brighter than ever. The container burst open and the souls within poured out, a torrent of shadows and screams. They swirled around the room, their voices a tumult of rage. I felt their cold touch, and it was like ice burning through my skin. Chaos erupted. The souls rampaged through the ship, tearing at the walls and systems, leaving trails of destruction in their wake. Rhea collapsed, the blackness draining from her eyes. She looked at me, terrified and confused. "Jax, what have I done?" "It's not your fault," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. "We need to get to the cockpit, now." We ran, dodging the souls that lashed out at us. The ship was a war zone, panels sparking, wires hanging loose. We burst into the cockpit, where Marcus and Lila were already trying to get the systems back online. "They're tearing us apart," Lila said. "We need to regain control." "Focus on the comms," I said. "We need to send a distress signal." As we worked, the souls continued their rampage. They smashed through the hull, and I could hear the hiss of escaping air. The pressure dropped, and the emergency bulkhead slammed shut, sealing off sections of the ship. Jet cursed under his breath. "They're trying to take the ship down." "We're losing control," Marcus said. "The ship's systems are failing." Then the lights flashed, and the comms panel began to spark. The souls had found their way into the ship's systems. The screens displayed a string of symbols and numbers, a sequence that made no sense to us. "Look at the screens," Lila pointed. The ship's interface was displaying a message, a stream of characters that twisted and danced across the monitors. The signal was broadcasting something. It was an encrypted message. "We can't shut it down," Jet said. "The signal's still going out." "We're losing everything," Marcus muttered, staring at the screens. "We can't even understand what they're sending out." The soul's grip tightened around the ship's systems. The message persisted, an incomprehensible jumble of codes and symbols. The ship's communications array was now broadcasting to the void. As the ship trembled under the onslaught of the souls, a sudden jolt threw us all off balance. The ship's systems fluctuated, and through the viewport I saw it. An alien ship, massive and imposing, appearing out of the void. It was a colossal cathedral-like structure, with towering spires and vast arches. The dark, reflective material it was constructed from seemed to shift and move like liquid metal, glowing green symbols and lines tracing the surface. Before I could react, the Black Hydra was caught in a tractor beam, a force pulling us inexorably towards the alien ship. The comms buzzed with static, and a deep resonant voice filled the cockpit. "You have called, and we have answered. Prepare for redemption." The souls within the ship, which had been rampaging through the corridors, suddenly grew calm. They started to congregate in the cargo bay, drawn back to the soul prison. Beams of energy shot from the alien ship, connecting with the soul prison and creating a web of glowing green light. Jet stared at the viewport. "What the hell is happening?" "I don't know," I said. "But I think we're about to find out." The deep voice continued through the comms. "You have played your part in our cycle. For this, you shall be spared." I watched in stunned silence as the souls were slowly drawn out of the soul prison, streaming towards the alien ship through the beams of energy. They moved in a slow flow, their previously chaotic forms now serene and purposeful. The sense of anger that had filled the Black Hydra began to dissipate. Marcus, standing at the control panel, shook his head in disbelief. "They're leaving, just like that." "Not just leaving," Lila said. "They're being taken back." The last of the souls left the ship, and as they did, the systems began to reboot. Lights came back on, the alarms silenced, and the damage to the ship started to repair itself. Panels reconnected, wires retracted, and the screens that had been filled with alien symbols returned to their normal readouts. "We're back online," Jet said, his voice filled with awe. "The ship's fixing itself." We watched as the alien ship retracted its beams, the last of the green light fading away. The massive structure began to move, its spires and arches shifting as it prepared to vanish into the void from which it had come. The deep voice spoke one final time. "You have helped to restore a lost civilization. For this, you shall be spared." And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the alien ship vanished, leaving us floating in the quiet of space. The hum of the soul prison was gone, replaced by the familiar, reassuring sounds of the Black Hydra. The crew looked at each other, relief and disbelief on their faces. Rhea, still shaken but recovering, managed a weak smile. The Black Hydra drifted through space, its systems now fully restored. We had survived, but survival had left us broken in ways we couldn't fully understand. The crew went about their duties, but there was a hollowness to our actions, a sense of being mere shadows of our former selves. Marcus was the first to leave. He said nothing, just packed his things and took the first shuttle off the nearest station. I understood. The ghosts of the souls we had carried tormented him, their faces seared into his memory. He couldn't bear to stay. The last time I saw him, his eyes were vacant, the spark that once defined him extinguished. I heard later he found work on a mining colony, somewhere remote where the silence would help drown out the screams. Jet stayed on, but he was different. The once cocky and fearless pilot now moved with a haunted caution. He spoke little, and when he did, his voice carried a weight of something unspeakable. He spent long hours alone in the cockpit, staring into the void as if seeking answers or forgiveness. I knew he blamed himself for not stopping Rhea in time. We all had our regrets, but Jet's were a heavy burden that grounded him in a perpetual state of melancholy. Lila withdrew into herself, her bright curiosity replaced by a cold detachment. She buried herself in her work, fixing and upgrading the ship's systems with a single-minded intensity. She rarely left the engine room, and her once lively eyes now bore a hardened, distant look. The nightmares came for her too, and I often found her staring at the walls, lost in memories of green light and ghostly whispers. Her laughter, which once filled the ship with warmth, was now a distant sound of the past. Rhea's recovery was the hardest to watch. The possession had left deep psychological scars. She would wake in the middle of the night, screaming and thrashing, reliving the horrors that had controlled her. We tried to support her, but she grew increasingly paranoid, convinced the souls had left something behind, a piece of their torment embedded in her mind. Eventually, she asked to be left at a medical facility, seeking help we couldn't provide. She didn't say goodbye, just slipped away quietly, leaving a void in our already shattered crew. And then there was me, Captain Jax, the one who had led them into this nightmare. The weight of command had never felt heavier. I spent sleepless nights replaying every decision, every mistake. I tried to find solace in the routine, but nothing could erase the guilt. The Black Hydra continued its voyages, but we were a ghost ship. Each jump through hyperspace, each docking at a station, carried with it the weight of our memories. We were spared, but the cost was our peace of mind, our sense of self. In the quiet moments, I would think about the alien ship, the souls, and the voice that had promised redemption. We had been instruments in a game beyond our understanding, and though we survived, the true price of our survival was something intangible, something that chewed at our souls long after the green light had faded.